second biggest monkey head I've ever seen.
I used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow in the knee.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
Hello and welcome to episode 30 of PvA Radio. I'm one of your hosts, Luke Croft. Joining me as always, freelance gaming journalist Cody Mellokline. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic. Also joining us today, the giant head on the right-hand side and the red meat napper himself, Larry Hunt.
It was delicious, and the nap was worth it.
Oh man! So it was my birthday on Saturday, and I invited Larry and another friend of mine over and cooked steak on my birthday for my friends because that's what I take joy in. And we sat and we watched the Overwatch League, and Larry fell asleep for a solid 25 minutes.
Watching the Justice, it was sleep-inducing.
It's very true. It was a very, very, very bad game. How are you doing, Larry?
I am frazzled. My computer doesn't want to work right tonight.
So Larry's face is gigantic on the right-hand side because we're still figuring out this new layout that we're working on here. It doesn't seem right because you're taking up as much screen as I'm taking up, and I got mine to look good. I'll work with it next week. You're just going to have to deal with it. If there's one person on this podcast whose face can be as big as it is, it's Larry's.
I like to think of it as you've just made my head on here match my ego.
Yeah, you're like Zordon.
Rangers.
For those of you who don't know, this is PvA Radio. We get together every week. Each of us brings one of the biggest gaming news stories of the week, and we have an in-depth discussion about it. It is your collaborative audio feature article, your CAFA, if you will. And what do we tell people to do with that, Cody?
Run your forehead.
Get it tattooed on your forehead. Cody's feeling it tonight. Like he has.
Dude, I'm getting a sickness is coming on. I'm feeling loopy. I'm feeling good.
All right. Well, I am really looking forward to this show then.
Yeah.
I'm done with the sickness.
You can find us live streaming every week over on Twitch. Guys, I'm trying to do a show over here.
Oh, okay. Can we be on it?
Yeah, you guys are invited.
We're doing a disturbed only podcast over here.
Go ahead.
Jesus Christ, guys. You can find us every week over here on twitch.tv/PVA Radio, live streaming at 9 p.m. Eastern time. This weekend, though, don't forget to spring forward, all right? An hour. I can't wait. If you don't catch us live, that's fine. You can listen to us on podcast services and on YouTube. Just search PVA Radio. Anywhere that you're finding us, drop us a like, a subscribe, whatever it is, and a review. Those are fantastic as well. And if you leave a review for us, Larry will read it out in a weird accent for you. That's my promise to you.
I'm glad you make these promises.
All right, guys. Well, no real housekeeping this week. I'm very excited about today's show. We have a lot of really great topics lined up for you. Also, going to kick your ass again in Two Truths and a Gaming Lie. I can already feel it. So, but let's get into this like we get into it every week with what have you been playing? Larry, let's start with you. What have you been playing?
I played a little Overwatch. It went better this week than it had been going. It wasn't good, but it wasn't as bad. And I've continuing to play unhealthy amounts of Apex Legends. I freaking love that game, and I'm so good at it.
Larry does not have a job anymore. He has since been fired.
Or a family. They left me.
Who needs family when you have Apex Legends?
That's right. They're all my family now.
All right. Cody, what have you been playing?
Still some Apex Legends. I got my third dub. It was the most anticlimactic thing possible because I played with two randos. At the end of the game, I had 1 kill. One of my teammates had 5, and one had 10. And at the end of the game, I was dead. And I didn't know what was happening, and then Champion came on the screen. So that was my win.
Hey, my first win, the other team killed themselves. So, look, a win's a win, man.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying.
I have a save clip of that game because it's my favorite win. We're just running up a hill, and all of a sudden we're the champions. We're like, oh, well, cool.
Fair enough. Like, how do you even kill yourself in that game, really?
You can jump off a cliff.
Well, Bangalore dropped her ult, and so if she hit herself with her ult, then I imagine that's what happened.
Okay.
True. And then I also played through the Devil May Cry 5 demo. I've never so that was a totally new experience. And I know there are 3 playable characters, but you only play as one in the demo. And it's a pretty short demo, I guess. I mean, it's kind of like the old school kind of demo. It's a pretty thin slice of the game, but it was, I don't know, it's big, dumb fun, which is, from what I understand, kind of the appeal of those games, in addition to just being like smooth combat experiences. So I had a good time. We'll probably wait for the game to go on sale because I don't know if it's 100% my kind of game, but from what I played, it was really fun. And one of the 3 playable characters who you don't get to play as seems super interesting. Like, it's not your traditional kind of hack and slash gameplay. So I do kind of want to test that character out. But I had fun for like the 45 minutes I played it.
All right. I actually have a list that isn't just Overwatch this week, but I did play Overwatch. Got a chance to try the new character Baptiste, who is a healer, because we don't have enough of those in Overwatch, do we?
No.
I won't get into all the nitty gritty details of what his kit does and everything, just because I know the majority of the people that listen to this podcast probably aren't quite as into Overwatch as I am, along with most people in the world. But I think it's a cool character design. He has a lot of mobility. I will mention one of his like more unique abilities is he throws out this immortality field, where everybody that stands within this radius is given like 30% health that they cannot lose while they're standing in the field. And so it creates some interesting opportunities to like fight in chokes where you couldn't before. Like, I think about how many times we've been destroyed on Hanamura Point A by a Bastion bunker comp. And now we can just throw out the Baptiste immortality field and stand it and kill everybody and then proceed forward. So, but then again, the team running the Bastion can do that as well. But I'm interested to see there's a ton of other things that are in this patch, and I'm interested to see how it all kind of shakes out, especially in the pro scene as we move into stage 2 of the Overwatch League here in about a month and a half. So see how that stuff trickles out. Also got a chance to play the Division 2's open beta, and I actually was playing that on PC, which I always like struggle to give a real good assessment of any kind of game that I play when I'm playing it on PC, because I'm still getting used to the whole idea of playing on a computer and like with a mouse and keyboard and stuff. But to me, it just felt a lot like the Division 1, just prettier, and the gunplay is awesome. That game still kind of puts me off in the sense of like, I don't like the fact that it's presented so realistically, but like you have these bullet sponge enemies. It's like, hey, here's this human I've got to shoot 55 times in order to drop him. It just doesn't quite sit well with me. But the whole DC thing's really cool. Your first staging area is the White House.
Oh, that's cool.
Which is pretty awesome. And I am probably going to pick up the full release of that game and try to get really into it, because I miss like how it was when I was really into Destiny, just kind of grinding after everything. So
I'm the same way. I'm probably going to get that as well, actually.
Awesome. For what? Xbox?
For Xbox, yeah.
All right, cool. I'll have to get it for Xbox. And then I downloaded the 10-hour trial for Anthem. Mm-hmm. And I'll say this, like, what you guys were saying last week about the flying mechanics, totally true. All right. It's super fun. Like, the abilities are great. The whole like superhero fantasy is awesome. But I got into my first mission where I was running it co-op with people, and I was playing with this headset on, and I had it cranked up because I just like to get lost in it, right? Well, I'm halfway through the mission, and my Xbox freezes. The game freezes, and it just goes massive, like a million times louder than that in my ear. And I ended up having to hard reset my Xbox to get it to even like shut down. And so that didn't sit too well with me. And then reading all the like stories coming out about it bricking people's PlayStations, like I'm just nervous to even start it up again.
Yeah, that game's been on that side of things. It's been so weird. Like I've not heard of a game before, I think, bricking anyone's console, and it's the first game we've heard of where its connectivity issues affected other EA games.
Yeah.
Just groundbreaking bugs coming out of it.
Well, that's what happens when a publisher goes into a developer's goes to the developer and says, "Hey, I know you guys probably need another like 9 months to polish this thing off. You mind shipping that this week?" Like it just, the issues I'm reading about just reeks of like they just needed more time. Like there's no way that they shipped this game and didn't know that these things existed, as widespread as a lot of them have been.
Yeah, there were also a lot of there. I know Jason Schreier was reporting, and he's written about this for a while. He's written about BioWare specifically for a while. They just the same thing with Mass Effect and Andromeda. They were trying to get accustomed to a new game engine, and a lot of the issues that came out of Andromeda were similarly kind of like game-breaking technical issues because they were adjusting to a new game engine. And reportedly, that's a large part of why this game took so long to develop in the first place. So I don't know. Yeah, I think they could have used a good chunk of another year to kind of iron this stuff out.
Yeah, it's disappointing because it's a game like, well, you can ask Larry back in the Player 3 podcast days. Like, I was excited almost every time I saw something come out about Anthem, and now it's just yet another like, it's just another thing that EA's made that people like to joke on because of these issues, and it really sucks. So, all right. Well, so we're trying out this new overlay over here on twitch.tv/PvA radio and also on the YouTube videos. So, the way that this works is pretty intuitive, guys. All right. If you're watching, well, when we're moving into the topics, it'll have the topic that we're on in purple so that you'll know. If you jump into the stream midway through and you're like, man, what the hell are these three guys talking about? They're off on some tangent about their favorite flavor of yogurt. What are they supposed to be talking about? Just read the purple title at the bottom and you'll see that, oh, they're talking about an Xbox without Halo and somehow just got off into the weeds. All right. So we're going to move into our topics now. I'm going to kick us off, and that is my topic. I want to talk about this article. Well, not article. It was actually an interview with Bonnie Ross from 343 Studios. Oh, no. GameSpot with their autoplay videos, guys. They're the worst. Anyway, she went on to Ryan McCaffrey's podcast, Unfiltered, and actually gave, like, a lot of really cool little tidbits about the history of the Halo franchise, but I wanted to kind of focus in on what I found most interesting, and this is actually from a write-up from our boy Eddie over at GameSpot. It says, after Bungie split off of Microsoft, the Halo series was something of a crossroad. Veteran Microsoft developer Bonnie Ross recalls in a fascinating new interview that at this time, some at Microsoft questioned whether or not the series would live on. Quote, when we spun Bungie out, the future of Halo was uncertain, end quote, Ross said in an interview with IGN. Quote, we weren't actually sure if Halo 3 was going to be the last game, end quote. As fans may recall, Halo 3's story ended in ambiguous fashion. Master Chief could have been dead. He wasn't, of course, and his story would go on to be continued in Halo 4 and Halo 5. Spoiler alert, guys. Master Chief didn't die after Halo 3. Those games were developed by 343 Industries, Microsoft's internal Halo development studio that Ross founded. She recalled pitching the idea for an internal Halo development studio, and the reaction wasn't entirely positive. Ross said she remembers then Xbox boss Shane Kim advising against it. He warned her that people at Microsoft might try to convince her to do things with the franchise that aren't right for it. Another former Xbox boss, Robbie Bach, also said it might not be a smart move to continue the Halo series with Bungie out of the picture, Ross said. Quote, Robbie Bach and Shane Kim were like, hey, Halo is great. Bungie doesn't want to do it anymore. Robbie and Shane were not people who were thinking just for the money, but it was basically like, hey, I think it's maybe good for another game or two and then just cut our losses and tell another story, end quote. So this is kind of where my topic starts, right? The story goes on to talk about how they considered like Gearbox to come in and develop these next couple games. They weren't going to create a full studio within Microsoft to handle the franchise. But what I want to do is I want to envision a future where envision a timeline in which Halo 3 was the final Halo game. And I think that this is going to be kind of an interesting thought exercise because I think to each, like Halo means a lot to each of the three of us, but I think it means a lot for us for different reasons. And so I just want us to think about like, where would Microsoft be today if they would have said after Halo 3, like, okay, we'll do like ODST and a couple little one-offs, but we're not going to continue the franchise into Halo 4 and Halo 5. So whoever wants to kick us off, like, what are your thoughts on this story, and then just what that future would look like?
I mean, it was an interesting story. I do have to correct one thing. And since my head is large on this screen, I'm going to do it.
Well, actually,
the ending of Halo 3 is only ambiguous if you didn't beat it on Legendary. Moving on.
Calling out Eddie.
Real
On the
gamer
podcast.
Boys. But in all seriousness, it was really interesting to me that they even considered not going forward with Halo because, I mean, Master Chief's face is on all of the Xbox boxes, right? Halo sells consoles, and you know, pondering the question of where would Microsoft be without Halo, like I go straight to the worst case scenario. Like I don't know that Microsoft would still be in the console market, because the launch of the Xbox One was kind of a rough time. And this has been a generation for Microsoft, plagued by a lack of console exclusives. And although Halo 5 wasn't received as well as other Halo games were, there were still people who continued to plod along with Xbox because they knew another Halo game was coming. And so I at the very least, I think they would have had a way tougher go of things in this generation without Halo. And I don't know that they'd still... I don't know that they would have turned that ship around.
Yeah, it is an interesting hypothetical. I think Gears probably would have taken a more central role in Microsoft's vision of what Xbox is. That's their other kind of primary exclusive. It doesn't sell consoles nearly as much as Halo, but Gears has a very solid, dedicated audience. They probably would have invested a lot more in that. I think sales for Halo have dropped ever since Halo 3. Halo 4 still sold reasonably well, but it was definitely... I think Halo 3 was like the pinnacle of sales for that series. And it was... I guess 2 and 3 were arguably the critical peaks of the games as well. So I don't know. I think if there was no Halo after Halo 3... I'd like to think that Microsoft would have started investing in more first-party studios more quickly, especially on the 360, where they did have a very strong presence and a very strong console. I think it would have been it could have been interesting to see them invest a lot earlier in what they are only now investing in. But it would have definitely been a much more brutal uphill battle for them with the Xbox One if they didn't have a Halo launching at some point on that console. The disparity probably would have been even greater than what it was. And who was in that article? Was there a mention of someone who was going to be taking over the Halo franchise? Did they? I remember the mention of Gearbox. Was that true?
Yeah, they thought about bringing in Gearbox.
And we can talk about that later, but I would love to talk about what a Gearbox version of Halo looks like.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are my overall thoughts, at least on what I don't know. It would have been a very different console generation this go around.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it would have happened at such a critical time for, I think any time where Halo would slip out of Microsoft's grasp would make it a critical time. But I think given the strength of the 360 at the time of Halo 3 and, and afterwards, I don't think Microsoft would have made the move to be like, well, we're just going to invest in other first party games because we lost Halo. I don't think they would have identified the gap, because I think if that would have been the reaction, they would have seen how big a gap it would have left. Even the hypothetical of seeing at the time, we're envisioning a future where Halo may not be a part of it, would have to ring some sirens, right? And you'd have to say without that, our library is this thin. And the fact that they didn't do that makes me think that if Halo would have, if they would have just let the franchise, go out to sea, then they wouldn't have filled that gap in, because they were doing so strong. And they had, it was the console for Call of Duty. The Xbox 360 became how back in the day parents used to say, you got to put the Nintendo down anytime they referred to video games. The 360 was Xbox taking that seat, right? And so I think that they would have just focused on the third-party stuff and on the partnerships there, and then it would have just been an even more abysmal launch for the Xbox One. Because they wouldn't have had, they'd have kept relying on Call of Duty and, their partnership there to be the big thing that they were riding on. But that was Call of Duty Ghost was the first Call of Duty game for the Xbox One. Not necessarily the best Call of Duty game to ever release. And so I think that we may even be looking right now at would Microsoft even be here if that alternate timeline would have panned out. Because the strategic move seems to be more we don't know what to do with this franchise now that Bungie's gone, and not more of not anything strategically to fill in the gaps for first party games or anything like that.
Yeah. I don't know. I can see a reality where they do. That's a big gaping hole in the heart of Xbox. And I don't think Gears can fill that. Gears being kind of really the only, I guess people underestimate how well Forza does for them as well, but I'm not a Forza fan, so that's not at the forefront of my mind. I don't know. I do think there's a reality where they could have at least tried to find something else to fill that hole, but I think the reality of the situation is probably what you said. They were in a great position, and they were extremely confident going into the Xbox One, which is why we saw a lot of the problems with the Xbox One in the first place. They'd kind of lost their way, so to speak, because of that inflated sense of self. So I don't know. I think I'd like to think my vision of it is right, but I think in reality, you're most likely right. It would have just been mistake after mistake. The only reason we've seen a Microsoft corrective is in reaction to someone else, is in reaction to another company.
And I think that watching how they handled this console launch just reveals how heavily they leaned on Halo 5.
Yeah.
It was a while before Halo 5 even came out, but there was just so little coming from them first party wise or even exclusive wise that when that game did not do as well as they probably anticipated it would do, it was not good.
Well, not just Halo 5, but also Master Chief Collection. It would have left two giant gaping holes, and forget the issues Master Chief Collection had upon its launch, but it was certainly a tentpole for them. It was a stopgap, knowing that they were trying to be pretty ambitious with Halo 5. I think just as far as like visuals and those sorts of things, and some of the things that they were doing within the arena. And I think that's the other road to kind of go down, because you can think about what does Xbox look like without Halo, but then you can think about like what do first person shooters even look like if the Halo franchise were to stop after Halo 3. Like Halo 3 definitely set a precedent for what arena shooters at the time looked like and as they went on, but I do think that there are things within Halo 4 and even within Halo 5 that have informed modern shooter design, especially in terms of like mobility.
And you can't forget Halo Reach. Although it didn't sell as well as 3, from 343's internal measurements at least, it's the favorite among Halo fans. So all 3 of those games did have a big effect on the shooter genre for sure. And I think they brought a lot of the more fast-paced approach into, like, they played a big role in making those types of games a little more quick than they had been. And we probably would have arrived at that anyway, but I think those games helped push it in that direction.
Yeah. I think Call of Duty had already kind of started to take over where Halo was leaving off. And arguably those are two of the most influential series, at least in what we see in modern first-person shooters. I do doubt we would have seen a Titanfall without a Halo 4 or a Reach. You're
So
right.
no Apex Legends, Larry.
So no Apex Legends, yeah. A lot of the DNA in terms of what you were saying, Luke, in terms of movement is definitely there.
Mm-hmm. It also would have made a much bigger impact that Xbox lost out on the Call of Duty partnership to the PlayStation 4 after Ghost.
Yeah.
Because there wouldn't have been a first-person shooter in the back pocket of Microsoft for people to be looking forward to. But it's an interesting thought exercise also, just because like none of the subsequent Halo games have not only just been as commercially successful as Halo 3, but none of them have been as well received either. Like, I think I enjoyed my time with Halo 5, but I know the story left a lot of people disappointed, and a lot of people take issue with Halo, well, especially Halo 4's multiplayer and stuff like that. And so, its impact on, not on name alone, but like you said, Cody, it's just a giant gap that exists in this library that would not have been able to carry them through some of the hard times that they ran into. But I do think the Gearbox thing is interesting. So Gearbox is known mostly for the Borderlands series. They did have involvement with the Halo franchise with Halo Combat Evolved. But Ross said that she thought it would be, quote, blasphemy, end quote, to have an outside studio make a Halo game. Guys, what does a Gearbox Halo look like?
Well, it's obviously
cell
far
shaded.
different graphically. Yes. This, I mean, was Duke Nukem Gearbox as well? Way back in the day. Am I crazy?
I don't know.
I may be crazy. Either way, but just looking at Borderlands, I struggle to think of Gearbox like approaching it with the seriousness that the game had been approached with. Like Halo is one of those rare games that is like, it's dead serious in its storytelling. It's very rarely funny. Sergeant Johnson kind of serves the comic relief, but maybe I'm wrong. Like Chris Hemsworth can go from serious to comedy. Maybe Gearbox can go from comedy to serious, but I have a hard time seeing Gearbox produce Halo with the seriousness that the franchise typically had.
You were right. Gearbox did help develop Duke Nukem.
So Master Chief rolls in. Every quote I just thought of is a quote I'm not going to say. Never mind.
Yeah, it would have been an interesting. I think they probably would have hewed more closely to what Bungie had done than a Borderlands version of Halo. Although I would have liked to see the version of Halo that is just like a buddy comedy between Guilty Spark and Master Chief. Guilty Spark is essentially the claptrap of Halo, and you can quote me on that. But yeah, I don't know. I think it probably would have been a lot more colorful. Maybe not cel shaded, but a little bit more colorful. I would genuinely want to play a Gearbox version of Halo. You can call me blasphemous for saying so, but I would definitely play that version of Halo.
I mean-
Especially knowing like they are actually pretty solid first-person shooter developers. Like the shooting in the Borderlands games is pretty solid, and it brings, I think, certainly a different personality to its games, a more irreverent personality than Bungie ever did. So I don't know. I would be interested in seeing like maybe a spin-off of a side story made by Gearbox. That could be interesting.
I think we would have started to see more movement into like the loot shooter. I don't think we would have gone full blown, but I think we would have seen more of kind of a loot grind in Halo that didn't exist before, because that's what the Borderlands series is partially known for. I mean, it's known for a lot of things, but it had a solid loot grind and had a lot of really great weapon diversity too. I think with an internal studio taking over Halo, and part of the reason it's had diminishing returns is because there's been this timidness to take that franchise and really iterate on it in a way that gets people excited about each of them. Like they want to be this hardcore arena shooter, and they want to tell this kind of story in this kind of way. And we're going to see even more timidness moving forward because of the way that Halo 5 storytelling was received. And because I feel like what they'll think is like, oh man, people didn't like that we bifurcated our story here. And really it's just like, no, you just didn't tell a good story.
And you advertised a different story than you gave us.
Yeah.
With it.
So I think bringing in an outside studio like Gearbox would have, especially a studio like Gearbox that had prior experience with the franchise, like you have that connection to the legacy of it, but you don't have people who are just bogged down by like the years and years of what this game has been. So I'm with you, Cody. Like I'm interested to see if Gearbox takes the franchise over, which from what it sounds like in the article, it wasn't that, oh, we're going to bring in Gearbox and they're just going to churn out Halo games from here to the end of time. It was, we're going to bring them in to like sunset the franchise in a couple games or whatever. But still, I think that ripens the field even more, because it's like, oh, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We can take risks because we know there's only 2 or 3 more of these games to go. I think it would have been interesting, and we would have gotten more interesting results than we did with Halo 4 and Halo 5, even if we didn't get Reach.
Yeah, I also think it would have been interesting to see what Gearbox looks like after that, because Borderlands is still very much their claim to fame. I would have been interested to see what they ended up doing after kind of shepherding Halo for a little while. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe they wouldn't have gone for Borderlands. Maybe they would have kind of been pigeonholed into something else.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's it for my topic, guys. Larry.
All right. So, for my topic, we talked about how, I mean, obviously Apex Legends has been super successful. I read earlier today they've now crossed the 50 million player mark. And they did it faster than Fortnite. And Polygon and Game Informer both had really good articles on that about how, okay, yeah, and that's a good milestone, but also it's now an established genre and people are looking for the game, so it's not really a fair comparison. But the game is successful. And we talked last week about how there's no doubt that Fortnite was going to be implementing some features from Apex Legends. And Luke said especially we're going to see the ping feature show up. And we all agreed with that. But I personally was shocked at how quickly it happened, because the ping feature is already in Fortnite. And the game had been out less than 4 weeks before Fortnite had implemented that feature. And it already appears that there's going to be some sort of respawning mechanic coming to Fortnite as well. So we're not shocked by this. But I kind of want to talk about, where is the line between iterating and implementing other features from other games and just straight up ripping other people off? And this may not seem like a fair question, but for me, just to clarify, for me, this is coming not just from a place of Fortnite took a feature I like from a game I like. And, you know, we talked, we're all for competition in games because it forces people to implement new things. It's good. But Fortnite as a game is like, it is just an amalgamation of other people's ideas, right? From the battle royale thing coming from PUBG, even the base game, what it was before. You've got a building thing where you're surviving zombies. Like it was kind of a more realistic Minecraft kind of deal in a lot of ways. Add some story in there. They're in the middle of multiple lawsuits where they've stolen all these dances from people without giving them credit. I don't know. I just kind of want to have a conversation about Fortnite's not super original, and there's space for talking about how they do things. Maybe they take an idea and do it better, but where is the line between iteration and just ripping off what other people do?
I think the line for me is just when it is so abundantly clear that you have done this because of this other thing, and that you worded it as iteration, right?
Yeah.
The line between iteration and ripping off. Well, iteration is taking an idea and building upon it as well. Like, and that's not just some sort of like arbitrary line I've drawn in the sand. That's like Merriam-Webster, right? And so for Fortnite to take this feature, this ping feature, and put it in their game without really any distinguishing factor to it that I'm aware of.
They sort of simplified it. There aren't as many options for things that you can ping.
Oh, well, and at the end of the day, how often are you pulling up the wheel, the ping wheel on Apex, you know? So I don't know if you can call that an iteration. Like, is that
That's
transformed?
streamlining.
Yeah, is that transformed enough in order for it to be something that's new? So that's my big thing is like, now I'm about to play devil's advocate to myself here. I do think it's a bit of an accessibility feature at the same time. Like for people who, don't have a microphone or are anxious about speaking on a microphone. Like, and so in that regard, I think it's like, okay, well, this is a quality of life thing. It's an accessibility feature. And so even if it's a ripoff, I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing, but that would be my conversation if Fortnite hasn't done this in multiple ways already with other games.
Yeah, this thing is definitely not unheard of in games or really any other medium. Like, people take ideas from other creators and kind of implement them, but the way it was done and Fortnite's Epic's history of doing this is kind of what distinguishes this. Like, there's no illusion about what this is. This is a direct response to a competitor and a very rapid implementation of a competitor's feature, something that has been pointed out by critics and players as something they love about a competitor's game. Let's take this, let's put it in our game. And that's obviously much more egregious because Fortnite was mired in controversy in terms of lawsuits based on the kind of game it was, based on ripping off PUBG, which was itself modeled on an older style of game, and ongoing lawsuits involved with dances and creators, specifically black artists. So it's not like this is unheard of behavior for Epic. And it was just the way it was done was just so bold. They're like, there's just really no attempt to hide what they're doing, which is kind of what frustrates me about it. But at the same time, I do sort of agree. It's a great feature. I can see why you'd want to implement it. I'm sure we'll see it in Blackout at some point. And it does help especially for people who are afraid to get on the mic, for people who have some sort of disability that prevents them from talking or kind of communicating in the way most of us normally would. It is a great feature, but I just think that the way it was done was just so shady that it's hard to kind of get on Epic's side on this one.
Yeah, for me, it's if this incident had happened, I'd just be like, huh, they took that feature from Apex, but against the backdrop of at some point I look at this game and I'm like, are there any original ideas here? And that may be unfair, but when you do this enough, I think eventually you wind up with that concept, right? You wind up with that reputation. And so I'm not really trying to clarify the legal line here, but do you think that there's a point where you cross the line and you damage goodwill with consumers? Like, does having the perception of, oh, this is the game that just steals ideas from other games, wind up damaging sales? Or do you think that's not really going to be a factor for this game?
I mean, think about Fortnite's target demographic. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not saying that in a disparaging way. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
they made their money appealing to a certain kind of audience, and they've made a lot of money appealing to that audience. And that audience isn't hopping on Forbes and reading some article about, how they stole this feature. So I don't think it's going to ultimately, in this instance, come back and bite them in the ass in any real way. I do think that there is a point where you lose goodwill with people. But I think for Fortnite, it's this game of have we already lost those people anyway? Like, the people that are complaining about this are the people who've already probably moved on to Blackout or Apex or one of these other games. And I think at the genesis of Fortnite Battle Royale, the goodwill was given to them because while they seem to have stole this idea from PUBG or whatever, PUBG was a broken shitstorm, and Fortnite wasn't. And so a lot of people gave it the pass because it's like, well, just because they did it and they did it better, and better was that it has consistent frame rate. But now you've got a lot of players in the field that are doing it well, and it really just does seem like a keeping up with the Joneses move when they take these features.
Yeah. I guess this doesn't really address your question, but there's certainly a point at which you kind of lose goodwill with consumers. Fortnite is not, as far as I can see it, is not in danger of reaching that point anytime soon. They obviously have a very successful product on their hands, and they have a group of people who are still dedicated to it, who most likely may also play Apex. I do think there's a point at which you kind of lose your identity as a developer and a creator, and that's a whole other conversation. But I do think that Fortnite did have an identity, despite the fact that all those pieces were taken from other games. I think the amalgamation of those ideas was unique to Fortnite. I mean, creating is essentially just stealing from everybody else and then assembling it in a unique way. And Fortnite clearly did that to great success. I do think that when you start to do it like this, where you just are sort of reactionary to what's going on and to what's going on with your competitors, you do risk kind of losing what made your game, in some people's minds, great or special. Apex Legends is an example of iteration. That is clear. Like, that is an example of taking an idea, a genre, and kind of evolving it and pushing it forward. This move by Fortnite is not that.
Yeah.
It is I mean, I'm sure the players who are playing Fortnite love the feature. But in the broader context of the industry, it is certainly, at least in my mind, approaching ripping off another developer to kind of just as a reactionary move.
And if the respawn option does wind up getting pushed through, if that does actually wind up coming to fruition quickly and it looks very similar, I think that's going to make everything we've already said just that much worse. Because the things I've seen, it appears that you're going to have to carry something from your teammate to a van that's parked that's going to be able to drop them back in, and I'm kind of like, that is exactly the same thing. The same mechanic, just skinned a little differently.
Yeah.
So as I was reading about those two features being implemented and the speed with which they've been implemented, it reminded me of something else. And I don't know how many people will be aware of all of this, but but it parallels Facebook rapidly implementing competitors' features to kill competition and secure their place on the top. And so anytime a rival social network has popped up, like Facebook has taken those features very quickly and implemented them in a very reactionary sort of way. And they've been able to do it so quickly that by the time you had a critical mass of Facebook users checking out some of those other services, they'd be like, well, Facebook already has this feature. Why would I come over for this? And so some examples of that would be when Google Plus started up. Google Plus was never going to succeed, right? But there were things that Facebook yanked out of Google Plus very quickly, really coming off of their circles idea so that you can be more selective on who you share features with. They purchased Instagram, and when Vine was a big thing, they implemented the video features of Instagram in order to kill Vine. And there were actually like internal communications that have come to the light of day to show some of these things. And so the two things that have happened is Facebook just has enough people that when they do that, they're actually very successful at squashing competition. So that's one negative result of that sort of reactionary thing. But the other result is I think that a lot of Facebook's problems and the reason so many of us hate it is because Facebook it's a mess, right? If you had never used Facebook before and you hop on Facebook today, you're like, what am I looking at? There is so much crammed in here. It no longer does anything like particularly well. It just does everything. And so considering both of those ideas, do you think there's a risk of either of those things happening in the gaming space or not really? Either Fortnite just squashing rivals, or I guess you've already touched on Fortnite losing Fortnite's identity.
Yeah, I'm not super concerned about the former, because I think gaming is different than social media in the sense that people aren't like checking forums every week to read about new social media platforms that they can hop into, whereas like people get excited about new games. You know, like Destiny can be awesome, but the Division 2 is coming. You know, and so I think gaming benefits in the sense of like people just want to play new things. So I don't see Fortnite being, and also gaming is just, what are you doing?
My camera's like not focusing on me. I'm trying to make it focus. Does it look blurry to you?
No, no.
Oh,
You're fine.
Yeah, you're good. But while we're in this break, when Cody was like, this doesn't address your question, I was really hoping he'd be like, but blueberry yogurt.
You really caught on this yogurt conversation.
It just brought it full circle. I've been eating a lot of yogurt. Anyway, there's also just far more options in gaming than there are in social media. You know, like in social media, you've got, 5 or 6 big players at any given time. And so yeah, I don't fear so much for that. As far as Fortnite losing their identity, I mean, what has been their identity? Like, and I'm not trying to talk shit. Like, look, I think Fortnite, for all of the like woes that it brought upon gaming and the amount of shit people talk and meme on it and all that, like, I think it is good for gaming. I FaceTime my nephew. My nephew's 9 years old. He had his birthday on Friday, and I FaceTimed him to tell him happy birthday. I got to talk to him for 45 seconds because he was having a Fortnite party where all of his friends brought their TVs over and they just played Fortnite together. It was a giant-ass LAN party like we used to do back in the day with, for me, it was Madden. We'd get together and do that with Madden and have a big Madden night. But if there's a game that's good enough to get my 9-year-old nephew to fall in love with games for the rest of his life, like that's a good thing for me. And do I necessarily agree with all the ways that they've gone about creating that game? No. But I do think it's a good thing because those kids are going to grow up. They're going to mature. They're going to get a more refined taste and, play better games like Apex Legends.
Yeah, I can't really speak to the former. I would agree with Luke on that, but um, in terms of the latter, in terms of it losing its identity, I think the only time it would kind of fall into the master of none category is if it just starts to take on pretty much every feature it can find, which that just doesn't practically that doesn't make sense in terms of development. Like the balancing of in order for Fortnite to become the Facebook of gaming, at least according to what you've said, it would be a completely unbalanced mess.
Yeah.
And Fortnite, despite the fact that it has been an unbalanced mess in the past, is still somewhat of a like you can play it and it's a balanced experience, relatively speaking. So I don't know. I think I just Fortnite does like, despite the fact that it does strip mine other developers, and other games for ideas. Fortnite did have an identity at the start. It has shifted that multiple times, but it did have a sense of identity. And I'm not concerned. Is probably too big of a word. I don't really care. I don't play Fortnite. I don't give a shit. But I do care about kind of artistic integrity and the integrity of developers kind of developing what they want instead of just reacting to something. And especially a player in the industry as big as Epic, it sets kind of a bad, if you just start, like you said, keeping up with the Joneses and kind of going about development in a reactionary way, it sets a bad kind of trajectory. It's not the kind of competition you want. You want iteration. You don't want just straight off reactionary development.
Yeah. I'm kind of with you on the former. I don't see them squashing other games. In order to do that, they would have to rapidly implement things and implement them in a better way. And I'm not trying to be a jerk here, but I just don't think that Epic is capable of doing that. Like, they're not going to do the ping better than Apex does it. They're not going to do respawns better than Apex does it. They did Battle Royale better than PUBG, but that's like saying I can jump higher than my 4-year-old.
It's not true.
Way to call me out like that. But with the Facebook of gaming, the area where the only area where I'm concerned is an area where they're not concerned, and they don't need to be concerned, right? Facebook, like when you think of Facebook, you think of the social network for old people. Like, that's what Facebook is. And Fortnite already kind of grapples with, when you think of Fortnite, you think of a game for children. But they don't grapple with it. That's the wrong term. That's their demographic, and that's fine. And I think that this kind of thing will just make it more, oh yeah, that's that game for kids that takes the features from the other game. I think it'll maybe cement them in that area, but it cements them in the area where people have the greatest disposable income. So there are worse places to be cemented. Well, I guess that's all I've got to say about that. I just I died laughing when I saw how quickly they had pulled that pin feature in. It was crazy.
I heard that Epic was behind those rumored Momo videos on YouTube where the person would come up and it just said, "Hey kids, go get your mom and dad's credit card and charge $200 to get some V-Bucks." All right, Codsworth, we're going to kick it over to you. What is your topic?
All right. Well, I could have talked about the THQ Nordic fiasco or the whole devotion story, which I find fascinating. But instead, I chose to talk about a story I saw that has to do with a game I've never played and never will play. There's a story on Kotaku about a new feature that was put into Warframe, which is a free-to-play kind of space ninja loot shooter. And essentially, it's an overhaul of the game's like daily and weekly quest structure. The same thing that, I mean, if you've played Destiny, if you played any really like loot grindy kind of game, you know what these are. But it's the way they've reworked it that is kind of impressive to me. They've essentially made a radio station in the game. And the host of said radio station is the one who kind of gives you daily and weekly challenges to complete. You can earn currency by completing those and pass those into her to kind of get rewards. So, I mean, pretty straightforward. but it's essentially like a radio play that is episodic in nature and takes place over the few weeks that quote unquote season of content lasts, and then a new chapter of the radio play starts. And so it's essentially rewiring a pretty traditional element of loot grind kinds of games and reworking it to fit a narrative structure. Like it's essentially just reconstituting this loot grindy thing into a pretty interesting element of a game that I haven't played, but I understand the basic idea of what they're doing. And so the only reason I started thinking about this was because we've been talking about Anthem so much, and the Division 2 is on the horizon, and we've definitely talked about Destiny ad nauseum. So I think basically my main question is, looking at this and kind of looking at the other loot shooters out there, is it possible to tell a compelling story at a loot shooter? That has kind of been the main sticking point for me for Anthem. Knowing BioWare's pedigree, knowing the stories they're capable of telling, and trying to balance that with a multiplayer first approach to game design. Those two, at least to me, seem inherently at odds. And so I guess my first question is, are there examples of games that you guys have seen, either loot shooters or multiplayer games in general, that do somehow balance narrative with the multiplayer element? Is there any game that you can think of that kind of does that? Because there's certainly great multiplayer games to me, and there's certainly great single player story based games to me, and I think those two tell very different kinds of stories.
Are you asking if it's good storytelling in game?
The story the
delivery.
developer is telling.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because there's obviously a difference between that and the stories that you're telling with your friends.
Oh no! I'm sorry. I'm talking about like Destiny 1 had a great story. It's just locked up in grimoire cards that you had to access like on your phone, right?
Yes, I am not talking about that. I'm talking about the story
delivered
the game
in game.
is telling. Yeah,
delivered in game.
Yeah.
Because I mean that is the story the game is telling. It's just not told in a very good way. So
Yeah.
because the other one that comes to mind for me, and not falling in that category of what you're asking. So not to answer your question, but like Overwatch does that well. Like it's not a story driven game, but there have been really cool like one-off PvE missions that you can play. They do awesome shorts. There's great comics. Like so.
Yeah, but a lot of that happens outside the game because of the nature of the game.
Exactly. And so I think I can't think of really a great example of any multiplayer game that's focused on like just the multiplayer side of it that tells a really great story. Can you, Larry?
So I'm going to give you two things. One is I want to mention Destiny as well. Because I think Destiny did a good job, but they just missed doing a great job in a lot of ways. One was they had a great story, you've already mentioned, but it was in grimoire cards, and it was stupid to have to find out the story that way. But even like the way you would go out and find public events, the idea of patrolling the planets, like I think that was a great idea that just could have been done a little bit better. Because that's the immersion that I'm looking for, right? I want it to be a little more random out there. Like we're just patrolling, looking for bad guys, and anything crazy could happen. But it's kind of a limitation of the technology we have that you can't get. Eventually, it's going to be predictable, and you're going to go exactly and do what you're going to do. But the other area where I think that Destiny like came close to doing something cool with the multiplayer aspect, and then didn't do it, was with the factions. So New Monarchy, Dead Orbit, that kind of thing. Like on paper, you're like pledging your allegiance to this faction and competing against these other factions, but in reality, it didn't make any difference except you got a different type of loot, and whichever faction had the most people doing stuff that week got a better piece of loot. So it was almost cool, but not quite. The one place where I've seen this done really well, like telling a story through multiplayer, is because of the uniqueness of the game, and it's Left 4 Dead. Functionally, Left 4 Dead multiplayer and Left 4 Dead campaign were the same exact thing. you would get the same story by playing through multiplayer as you would get through playing through the campaign. You were just less likely to complete those missions because it was harder to beat people than to beat the AI. And it was done in a really cool way, different sections of a story, but each one functioned as a one-off in a lot of ways. And even the DLC like wound up being a really emotionally impactful. Like they killed off a main character in the DLC. A 4-player game killed one of the main people, and it was a pretty cool way to do it. Like it was a story that sometimes you might lose it in how frenetic things were, but for the most part you could track with it. The dialogue in the game was a little bit different every time, but it did manage to tell the story well, even though you were competing in a multiplayer sort of way.
Didn't Titanfall, the first Titanfall, because I jokingly thought you were going to say one multiplayer game that I think did it well was Apex Legends. But didn't the first Titanfall try to add like cutscenes before specific game types or specific maps? Not super long ones, but just like little narrative bumpers to get you into the game.
So in Titanfall 1, the story was told through the rotation of multiplayer maps, but I would not argue that was a story done well.
Right. I'm more thinking of just like unique ways to do it, because to me, the hang up, and I'm sure we're going to get to this is just like the medium itself like doesn't lend itself to great storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It is difficult to think of examples. I think Left 4 Dead, I think, is an interesting example to bring up. I personally don't play Left 4 Dead for the story that they're telling me. It's essentially just at least in my mind, a bunch of like cliche scenarios that are given meaning because you're doing it with friends. But that's just my opinion. I think, I don't know.
It's just like your opinion.
That's just like my opinion, man. I think this has been we've been having this conversation in games for a long time. I just think Anthem is the most interesting example of where this conversation is taking, because the two parts of itself it's basically pulling itself. Like there's Fort Tarsis, which is essentially where all the narrative happens, and then where all the narrative and the characters exist. And then outside in the world, you're getting fed story through your comms, like in Destiny or the Division or anything, but you're pretty much just playing with your friends. And they're just so at odds with each other. Like the fact that you have to essentially, if you're playing with your friends and you really care about the story, you essentially have to mute them to be able to enjoy the story that BioWare is telling you, is proof that, at least to me, that these things, at least implemented in Anthem as they have been in the games we're talking about, it's just not compatible. Like you can watch a movie with friends and still get the same experience that you're getting if you watch by yourself, I guess, to a certain extent. But a lot of stories are meant to be experienced and allow you to engage with them best when you're either by yourself or in silence with someone else kind of reflecting on it. And if your friends are just like talking about their days or making dick jokes while you're trying to enjoy a BioWare level story, it doesn't exactly help the game's case that it's trying to tell a compelling story. Well, at least that's how I see it.
Well, I used to get so excited about games that supported like online co-op campaigns, but then it's one of those like the concept is better than the like practical implementation of it, because it's like, oh shit, somebody press the skip button on a cutscene, Seth.
I'll never admit it, Seth.
Or, oh, this person was talking during a one-off thing that a character said in the middle of a fight, and I didn't get to hear it. And so I think what you said was perfect. Like, it's at odds. The two concepts are at odds with one another. Like, hey, we want this game to be social and we want it to be interactive and we want you to be able to jump in there and have a good time with your friends. But what good time with your friends other than watching a movie ever results in you being like, hey, Larry, can you shut the fuck up for a second?
Yeah. I am so kind of, I guess, branching off from there. I think this example of Warframe is interesting to me because it is an example of a kind of taking an interesting approach to imparting story and lore and narrative inside a game like this. But it's done in a very focused way and in a very small scale way. So I guess I'm wondering more is the problem that the lack of like we've been talking about with Destiny and Bungie, that they just they shot for the moon and kind of failed, or maybe they should have kind of set their sights on something more attainable, which is a smaller scale story. Because a lot of these games, the central premise is that you are the one, or like you are the hero of the story, and it's hard to really believe that when your two friends are next to you and they're wearing the same armor or have the same capacity for power. So are these games sort of better suited to telling, I guess, less overarching stories and more just kind of small scale, personal, bite-sized stories?
See, I feel like this could be done well, but I don't know that games as a service is a place for it to be done well. And I've played, I'm actually a big fan of co-op campaign games, except when Seth skips cutscenes. But like, I think the issue you run into is twofold. One, you're right. Like, if the game centers on you are the one, like that can't happen. There's got to be room for multiple people to be important, or the game has to center on nobody's important, which is actually my preference.
And it's not what video games do very well.
Yeah, but then the other thing is, if you give someone agency in a story, they are going to have the capacity to ruin someone else's agency in the story. And I think that's where it gets tricky. Like, there are concepts that I would love to see done, and I can imagine them going terribly wrong. Like Until Dawn as a multiplayer game where multiple decisions are made that are impacting, but I can ruin what you're trying to do if I've got the same amount of agency as you do. That kind of idea. I think a more traditional RPG approach back before the games as services thing would be an interesting approach to that kind of game, where our decisions are going to produce different storylines, different outcomes. So still something in the vein of Until Dawn as far as decision making goes, but a different type of game, like a Destiny with a set story, but things go differently depending on the choices you make, and that gives replayability, and we can go through and make different decisions. Like, I'd like to see more experimentation in this, but as long as the story is going to center on you being the one, and I have to have my agency limited so I don't ruin someone else's epic story, I don't think it can be done particularly well.
Yeah. Another big problem these games run into outside of just being the one is that most of them have silent protagonists. And I think that's why Anthem, to me, like, is cool, is because your character actually has a voice. But like, you play Destiny and your ghost speaks for you. You play the Division. Oh my gosh, dude, the cutscenes in the Division 2 and in the first Division, they're terrible because it's just like, walked in, oh, thank you so much for saving my daughter.
It's the same in GTA.
For those listening on audio, it's just me nodding my head. It's just that doesn't do it for me. That pulls me right out of any kind of epic moment that I'm having, where everybody else is talking and celebrating, and my character is just kind of silently standing there. I think there is an opportunity in. Well, one of the things that these games fear so much is locking players out of certain aspects of the game because they have chosen a specific character role. Like, big thing in Destiny was like, okay, I can pick a hunter or, any of these other Titan, but you can use any of the guns. You can, have any of these abilities. Like, same thing in the Division 2. Destiny's, in the Division. Destiny's a little bit of a unique example because of like the ultimate abilities and stuff for each class, but at the end of the day, they're all virtually the same outside of those abilities. I think there is an opportunity if you have the same, because I think about like me, right? I have the same group of friends I play every game with, basically, where if we can all decide on who we're going to be, you can have a squad based story where it's like, hey, there's these 4 characters, and then it gives your game replay value, right? Like, how many people that play Destiny do you know that have like 8 maxed out characters, right? Like, it's a ridiculous amount of people. It would attract people like us who care more about the story in those kinds of games to replay. Like, I don't ever start new characters in those games because there's no reason to. But if Larry as a hunter has a different story than me as a Titan, it may make me go back and say, oh, well, now I want to go play as a hunter. So I don't know if we're there yet. Like, I think that would be a massive undertaking for a game, but I think we can get there. But I think in the current state that those games are in, it's just not a really great climate for good storytelling.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think developers have made, even between Destiny 1 and Destiny 2, have made sort of small strides. I think in Forsaken, Bungie actually was able to tell a pretty good story, but it's, again, smaller scale, personal stakes, not really like that on the epic grand scale of the rest of its story. And you are still at the point we've gotten to at Forsaken, the joke is that your character does not talk. Like, they make jokes about it in game, which to me seems like that's Bungie's way around a huge mistake they made in the first place, because you do talk in Destiny 1. This is a tangent, sorry. This just bothers me so much, just like you, Luke. But yeah, I think obviously loot shooters and games of services are not going anywhere, but I'll be interested to see how developers start to address this, because I thought Anthem would be the one to kind of bring these two halves together, and it just proved how much more divisive and at odds with each other they really are.
I think another big hurdle is, and this ties into agency as well, but your choices can't make a real difference, right? So normally when I go through a story, like, things about my character and that world and other characters change, but those are much more limited in these sorts of things because you don't want to leave anybody behind. But I'd like to see one of these games of services like take some risks on that front. And what made me think of this was, as much as I've crapped on them this episode, I'll throw them something happy, is Fortnite, and how in different seasons they change their map, right? In Destiny, like, something might get destroyed, something fell under attack, I might liberate something, I take out this big guy in a raid, but functionally, like, nothing changes in the world. I think it would be cool to, like, the players' actions actually make an impact, and there's a time limit. I've got to jump in and participate, or I might actually miss something cool that happened. And I think that would, like, pull people in a little bit more, and I think it would also I mean, it would just make the story that much better. And if you missed it, you'd have to hear about it through someone else.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that Destiny 2 did was kind of on that line of it did change the world was when you started the game, you had one common area, and then when you finished it, oh shit, we're back in the tower, guys. This is awesome, right? Like, that was a cool little, like, hey, the world does change. It's a different common area. You can't, but you have to avoid all of these, like, forks in the road where, oh, you can go here, but your friends can't go there with you because they're not this level or they haven't completed that part of the story yet. And, like, Anthem tries to get around that by just everything's wide open, right? But then it's like, oh, I'm playing with Cody who's 6 missions ahead of me and I have no fucking clue what's going on and everything's getting spoiled for me. You know, so, like, you have to draw a line somewhere, or you have to, like, individually amongst your friend group draw a line somewhere. Like, I know with Destiny, Ben and I were like, oh, we're going to play this story all the way through together. Why we did that is beyond me. I think it's because that's the way we did Destiny 1. But Salty as Chuck.
Later,
go ahead.
Too, my bad. I was going to make a joke. I thought you were talking about the first Destiny. I was like, and 2 hours later, you're like, oh, that story wasn't that great.
Oh, we did that with that one too. Salty as Chuck says, Borderlands 2 had a story, and while it was off the beaten path quite a bit and it was lengthy, it definitely had a beginning, long, middle, and an end. I played Borderlands 2 on my Vita, so not the best place to experience the story.
Yeah, I consider Borderlands does tell an interesting story. The world is more interesting to the story than the story to me, but that falls more in line with what I see Left 4 Dead as. Like it is a co-op experience first, and kind of like, plus if it's comedic, it's a little bit easier for you to kind of enjoy it with your friends. If you're telling like an ultra serious story like what Anthem is trying to do, it's makes it a little bit more difficult.
I think for one of these games to be really successful, the world has to be the character, and I think it has to be about like mystery and uncovering a mystery together. Because again, you're not the one, right? You're just a character in this world, uncovering the secrets of this world. Like, I think that's a good way. I think about like Fallout 76 had so much potential to be a cool game where you're uncovering the world, and I guess this goes back to you caveating it if it's not about creating your own stories. But if you set up the world in such a way that as you're playing through it, you discover things about the world and how it got to be the way that it is. And like, you know, Larry tracking through that cult that he found in Fallout 76, like that stuff is cool. And I think if story's going to be done really well now in those kinds of games, that's what it's got to be about. But these games require so much build up into them that like the Division, right? I think the story behind the Division is really, really cool, but they had to present almost the entire story before the game ever came out to even get people excited about it. And so there's not enough room there to like give people the space to discover it when they get into it, because you're relying so heavily on people jumping into it right at the beginning.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys have anything else, but I've sort of expressed
is an
that.
interesting example. They like there's this you're in battles, but you're pledged to a faction, and depending on how you do in your battles, you get to deploy troops to a larger world map and turn the tide in a larger battle that's happening. But again, they fall short, and your allegiance to that faction doesn't really make any kind of real difference.
Yeah.
And that's where I keep landing on this. You can't make a real difference. It's a games of services problem, and it's sort of like the TV versus movie problem. You know, you can't go through the full story arc, the whole Joseph Campbell, all those stages thing in a sitcom. Like at the end, the character can't change. The character has to return to normal. No one can ever learn anything or grow, because you got to keep that show going episode after episode, season after season. So you don't get as much story in general in TV as you do in a movie in general.
Salty as Chuck says, it's so dumb to see 4 players in a party defeat the boss and it be addressed as the Guardian that you did it. Yeah. I feel like with Destiny, it would have been just so much easier to be like, the ghosts started resurrecting Guardian, like, and it's about Guardians, not the Guardian, a Guardian. Like, and I think they tried to do that a little bit, but then near the end of the story of the first one, like of the main story of the first one, very first story, it started to become a you're the one kind of deal. But yeah. I think that's a perfect example of a game that didn't need to do that.
Yeah, the storytelling in Destiny is just all over the place. I don't know.
All right, guys, let's move on to everybody's favorite game that we play at the end of this show in 2019. 2 Truths, Gaming, and a Lie. I just throw the word gaming somewhere in there randomly. All right. So remind everybody how this works. I have a random game that I select by saying games that came out in, I pick a random year, and then I pick a random game. Then 2 of these facts are true. One of them is false. I will read them out. Our 2 esteemed contestants here will have to determine which one is the falsehood. If neither of them get it correct, I get a point. The score, I have 3. Cody has 1. Larry, yet to get on the board after a month of playing this game. All right. Here we go. Our game this week, Dragon Age Origins, which came out in 2009. After 400 years since the last Blight, a new archdemon seeks to destroy the land of Ferelden. It is up to the player. What's that?
Those are all words.
It is up to the player as one of the remaining Grey Wardens to unite the divided armies of Ferelden and save humanity. That's not one of the facts. That's just the synopsis of the game, all right? Here we go. Here are your 3 facts. Or are they? Number 1. After entering the Denerim Market District at least 42 times, There is a chance that a random encounter dubbed Zombie Kitten Army can appear, spawning a group of 9 unmoving cats in formation. Number 2. In writing the character of Alistair, David Galder drew inspiration from Buffy the Vampire Slayer's Xander and Firefly's Mal Reynolds. Number 3. One of the rarest elixirs in the game is known as Cry Ramonad, an anagram for David Galder's favorite George R.R. Martin character, Mance Rayder. All right, Cody, we're going to start with you this week. Which one of these is a lie?
So we got number 1, the cats.
Yes. If that's
2,
the one takeaway you took from that smorgasbord of words.
I'm summarizing. Zombie cats. 2 was the Firefly Buffy the Vampire Slayer inspiration, and 3 was Mance Rayder.
Yes. Yes.
I'm going to go with 2.
All right, so he thinks that David Galder did not take inspiration from Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Firefly. All right.
I'm not going to make it interesting this week because Xander and Mal are weird characters to mash together. So I, too, will go with 2.
The answer is number 3. Number 3 is the false one. Salty as Chuck in the chat, very confident that the cats is the false one. Everyone participating in this game is incorrect. I get yet another
didn't know
point.
you were such a Game of Thrones fan.
Dude, I love Game of Thrones. You didn't know that?
But you're a big Mance Rayder fan?
No, I just picked a random character. I mean, Mance Rayder is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But no, I just picked a random character and then.
I thought you were just a stan of Mance Rayder.
Well, at first you thought that David Outer loved Mance Rayder, or else you'd have picked that answer. So.
True. He's getting confident here.
Yeah. Well, I'm up 4-1-0, so I can't be losing for at least another month. So that makes me feel pretty good. All right, guys. Who are you? Where can we find you? What are you going to be tweeting about this week? Larry, let's start with you.
I'm Larry. You can find me on Twitter at LarryHuntsZombies, LARHNTS, Zombies. And I'm still not tweeting, so I can technically start tweeting again this week. But I've arrived at the crossroads where I don't know that I want to.
Twitter's so much cooler than any other social media. At least get back on. At least get in the Discord server with us.
Yeah.
You know, I think I'm going to fire up the Google Plus, jump back in.
Well, you are in for a harsh surprise, Larry.
Anyone's still on AIM?
All right, Cody.
I'm Cody. You can find me on Twitter at ProElectioneer. I just finished up True Detective, so I got some thoughts about that. So I will probably be reflecting and tweeting about that throughout the week.
All right. I'm Luke Croft. You can find me on Twitter at Hoagie_OW. And this week I'm just going to be tweeting about how much Bumper would be feeding on any other team that he played for. So if you watch the Overwatch League, you know what that means. Everybody else is one that thinks that sounds about the same as the Zombie Kitten Army point on. All right, guys, this is PvA Radio. We get together every week over here on twitch.tv/PvA Radio. Each of us brings one of the biggest gaming news stories of the week. Then we have an in-depth discussion about it. Consider it your collaborative audio feature article, your CAFA, if you will. Larry, what do they have to do with that?
Tattoo it to your forehead.
I like how every week it sounds more and more like the WWE. If you miss us live, you can catch us on YouTube and on podcast services everywhere. Just search PvA Radio. Wherever you're finding us, like, subscribe, share, give us a review, thumbs up, whatever. If you give us a review, Larry will read it in a weird accent. I'm making promises for him. All right. Until next week, guys, we love you. Goodbye.
Why, that's the second biggest monkey head I've ever seen.
I used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow in the knee.
The definition of insanity.